Okay, the only way to get to this area, it's one of the most isolated areas of the Russian Federation, is by, in the summertime, you can go up and down the Yenisei River in steamboat, but those end at the end of August because it's already starting to freeze by that time. There's only one airport that you can fly into, Turhansk, in the Turhansk district, and from there you have to go by other means of transportation, helicopters and so forth, to get to the areas where the Ket people actually live. The reason why this area of Siberia is so undeveloped is because, unlike Western Siberia, there was no oil and natural gas ever so far discovered there. And unlike Eastern Siberia, Yakutia, there was no gold, diamonds, uranium discovered in this huge, vast area. So most of Central Siberia, an area larger than France and Germany, is essentially the same population as it was 200 or 300 years ago. Not really that much different. And that may change immediately if some new resources are discovered there. But if you go there, you get the sense that this is one of the most unspoiled areas of the world. And the only way to get to the areas where most of the areas where the Ket people live is by a helicopter. You have to rent a helicopter and squeeze yourself in between the various boxes of produce and alcohol and other things that are being brought into the outlying areas from the Yenisei River itself. The Ket population is several hundred, but only a very few of them still speak the language for reasons I'll tell you soon. When you fly in the helicopter over most of the Turhansk region where most of the Ket people live, this is what you see. This is all you see. This is an area that no one has ever permanently lived in. Only reindeer people have moved through it temporarily, or Ket hunters moved through these forests temporarily. This is the Yelagui River, where the largest concentration of Ket people have survived. Way up this river, it's the only large western tributary of the Yenisei. Most everything else flows into the Ob River. This is a kind of a swampy area of Central Siberia. This is where the Ket people live, and you can fly for hours. And then you finally get to the village. About a little over 300 people live in this village, and a large number of these are Ket people. And only a minority of them actually speak the language. And this is what the countryside looks like. For 800 miles in all directions, there's no roads, there's no railroads, there's only the helicopter that comes in. This is what it has always looked like, probably for the last several thousand years. Helicopter comes to Khelok, which is named after the river Yelagui, only once a week for half an hour. There's no medical really there. There's no police force, and you're basically on your own when you're in this area. And there's delicious fish, there's delicious berries, and so forth like that. And then there's some things that the helicopter has brought in during its weekly visit. The way to get around, besides walking, which won't get you very far, is by canoe, or some people have motorboats that get you from local areas. But that's really your connection with the greater area is by this. And this is how the Khelok village looks like from one of the boats. This is a photograph that I took. And you can see it's built on a high hill here, and a high riverbank, because it's less swampy and fewer mosquitoes there. And this is Main Street. This is a very busy day on Main Street. There's 5 people out. Some Ket people I knew, they couldn't stand living on Main Street because they can't get used to 5-10 people every day. So they move farther towards the forest. Okay. Now this is remember, fewer than 50 people, all over 55, probably all over 58 years of age, speak the language. Okay. Now, the Ket people are not just linguistically unique, but they're culturally unique in a great number of ways. They were the last hunter-gatherer peoples of all of Inner Asia, Inner and North Asia. Even though on the Pacific Rim we have hunting-gathering peoples that have cultures related to Eskimoan cultures or Ainu type of fishing-related cultures, these people are completely unrelated to the Kets, at least in their language. But the Kets were the last inland hunters in all of this area that were oriented more to upland hunting. And they did fish in the summertime, as we'll see. And they were still hunter-gatherers all the way up into the 1930s. But then the third of 3 major revolutions that forever transformed Northern Asia occurred. And this was the Soviet Revolution, the Stalin Revolution, collectivization, sedentarization. The Kets were forcibly settled into villages like Khelok that you see that were carved out of forest. And that's where they mainly live today. And their children were taken away from them and put into boarding schools and forced to become speakers of Russian. And so this was the beginning of the end of the Ket language, because most of the Kets who were born after this period of time actually began a switch to the Russian language, and their parents, then their children only heard Russian after that. So the culture and the language, there's a significant break, and so only people who are in their 70s or 80s know Ket fluently, and if you find someone in their 50s or 60s that know the Ket language really well, something special happened in their life that made that possible. For instance, Tingdilang, she went to the boarding school. She went through that whole experience, but she had an elderly mother who she spoke with every single day, and her mother's still alive. There she is. And she doesn't speak very much Russian even, and so because of this everyday speech with her mother, she was able to maintain the language fluently, despite all of these tremendous cultural changes that were forced on the Ket people. Marina Irikova, she ran away from the boarding school when she was 7 years old and went back into the forest, rejoined some of her relatives there who were nomadizing. She didn't basically come out permanently again until the 1990s, and her Ket is very fluent as a result of that. And he also, Dumgit, ran away and when he was 6 years old from the boarding school and hid under an uprooted tree for 2 days until they stopped looking for him, and he went back into the forest and found his aunt and uncle, and he was raised by them, living as a hunter in the lifestyle that the Kets had before the Sovietization of this area. And as a result of that, even though he's quite a young person, he is a perfect speaker of Ket, and he knows all of the hunting terminology. It was only from him that I was able to get a full roster of words for birds, for fish, for different kinds of plants. Almost none of the other Ket people remembered these words, except if they're common things that people might know in Russian anyway. So this may be the last person on earth that knows this information. Okay. And this is the forest in which the Ket people had traditionally lived, and in which it was still possible to escape. This area of Siberia is so isolated that the Soviets under Stalin didn't even build any part of their gulag in this area, because it was a little bit too hard to get to. You had some in the Arctic and in other places, but this area was not part of that. This is still the world's largest forest, Siberian taiga. It's a beautiful, beautiful forest. The Ket people traditionally had a lifestyle that was oriented specially towards the rivers in the short summer months, and there's a lot of folklore associated with female goddesses, benevolent female goddesses, and this was grafted together with an upland male hunting culture that took over during the colder months of the year. And I believe there's ethnographic evidence to suggest that these really were two cultures and maybe two genetic populations that merged to make the modern Ket culture. We'll get into that a little bit later. This culture still survives in bits and pieces. The Ket people, even though they live in these villages, they will go off for months, sometimes at a time, on fishing expeditions, and the house in the village is kind of more like crash pad in some ways. So Ket people still are a little bit nomadic like they formerly were. And the Ket people only had domesticated dog. No domesticated reindeer. That makes them completely unique outside the Pacific Rim in North Asia, because everybody else was reindeer people or horse breeding, cattle breeding people. And not all the dogs are as cute as this. One of the ways you necessarily need to do when you get to Ket village, you've got to find out which is nice dogs and which is not. And the ones that are nice are maybe 5 or 6. And there's 2 dogs for every person, and it's very dangerous to be walking around and you touch a gate of a house and the dog will not like that. So that's one of the things that is tricky about this area. Everyone around the Kets are reindeer breeders. And farther south, you have horse breeders, cattle breeders, Mongols, Turks, and so forth like that. And the Kets are not. And this is very important. And the reason why the Kets could survive when reindeer breeding meant all over North Asia is because the area on the western side of the NSA where they survived was so mosquito infested. By the way, the word mosquito, sui, in Ket is actually cognate with the Athabascan word for mosquito, which is pronounced sort of, it depends on the dialect, but something like tsiu. in these languages. It's so mosquito infested that you cannot keep penned up reindeer in the mosquito season because they breathe in so many mosquitoes that actually suffocate. And during the worst part of July, which the Kets call Suidokip, which means mosquito flying month, you actually cannot be outside without special protection. The Kets traditionally had a type of houseboat they made out of birch bark that they moved into the very center of the Yenisei River where mosquitoes could not fly, and they fished for a few weeks until the mosquitoes died down. But mosquitoes don't even die down in mid-August when you start having freezing temperatures every night. They were still trying to get a little bit of extra stuff for the winter, even in late August when I was there. So there's mosquito season all the warm time, but in July it's the worst. All right, let's get to brass tacks. What is really interesting is, look, there's supposedly some linguistic information that links these two families that are very far apart on very different continents. They're so disconnected that it seems almost like science fiction. How could these two groups be related and not some other groups related? And so maybe if you're not a linguist, even before you decide to start going into the difficulties of looking at sound correspondences, you might really want to consider whether this is even humanly possible, that this connection could be the case. And that is what I want to spend the rest of the time, for the most part, talking about in this lecture, to bridge this Dene-Yeniseian disconnect in time and space to show how I believe this connection actually came about in history. Using genetic and archaeological data. And what I want to attempt to do is something that I think linguists should do more often, and that is to look at evidence that has been gained by archaeologists, by specialists in human genetics, by anthropologists who study material culture, either from archaeology or from studying modern peoples, and finally look also at indigenous spiritual and intellectual heritage, which in some ways I think is the most important thing. When we study the Kets, we find that their migration stories all come to be similar to what we're finding out from linguistics and from genetics. We find out that they did have stories about pastoral peoples pushing them up the Yenisei River. It took us until the end of the 20th century to figure out what the Kets knew all along. Language is only one of these threads. And what is very interesting is where you have a very likely linguistic connection, but the human genetics DNA sort of fits but doesn't seem to fit, or the archaeology sort of fits and doesn't seem to fit. Sometimes the male DNA, the Y DNA, tells a different story than the mitochondrial DNA. And what is interesting is try to triangulate all of these things and try to find one way where all of these disparate stories become one single story and fit. And then you might begin to have a hypothesis about what really happened in prehistory. Because these are not different stories, they're all different parts of the same story, and different disciplines of the humanities are capable of looking and discovering different aspects of the same story. So why not try to put them all together? I'm going to attempt to do that today. But remember, as far as concerns language relationship, only linguistic comparison and evidence can truly prove that languages are related and come from a common source. So even if I present a scenario whereby the ancient Yeniseians, or at least some of their ancestors, and the ancient Na-Dene, at least some of their ancestors, look very likely to have been a single person, even if I could almost conclusively prove that to you, it wouldn't prove the languages are related. Because people can switch languages, even if they were one people in the past. Only language data can prove that. But that's not the predominant thing I'm going to do today. I want to look at the bigger picture. All right? Some of the bigger